Hello everyone. Today I'm in Dublin City, just down by the old fruit markets if people know it. There used to be a cash and carry here for a while, Fagan's cash and carry, if people remember this part of Dublin City, right in the Lewis tracks and quite close to the forecourts behind me. Today I'm talking about the catastrophic issue of homelessness in Ireland and in Dublin. As you can see on this street, there's about 10 tents where people have struggled to find accommodation. This is quite close to Dublin city centre. 2024. So when the politicians are heading off on their junkets in the next number of weeks to say how great Ireland is, this is the reality on the ground, where you see so much exclusion, poverty, misery in people's lives. Ireland's have had a long history of evictions and a long history of struggling for our rights. And homelessness is a working class issue. Some people in society have tried to normalise it. People have become desensitised to seeing people on the streets. People have tried to rationalise it, to blame it on people's bad behaviour. This has been part of the mantra pursued by the governments and the political establishment's propaganda to accept homelessness, which should never be accepted or tolerated in any society. Much the same with Irish history, what we've had, the struggle against evictions with the British oppressors for many years. We saw the Land League being organised to resist against evictions. The barbarity and inhumanity of people being pulled from their homes being set on fire as they've been sent to workhouses and live in abject misery and on famine ships as well, with our long history here in Ireland. But since the foundation of the Irish Free State, this policy has continued. The rights of the landlords, developers, speculators, and the super rich and the 1% have always been upheld at all costs. In the 1930s, the government went on a building scheme, built a lot of estates around Dublin, such as Crumlin, Cabra, many working class estates where great people were raised. But they were forced to do that because of the huge implications on society in terms of people who were living in tenement style conditions, overcrowded, families in one room, where disease was rife, mortality at a young age was rife. And following the pressures, they were forced to build a lot of council flats and council homes all around the city. And since the foundation of the state, a policy has always been to sell off our council housing built through public money, where since 1922, 2 out of every 3 homes built through our public money and previous generations' public money have been sold off. And now many are in the hands of private landlords, charging astronomical rents to people struggling for accommodation. But this has been fast-tracked since the financial crisis, where the Irish government opened the doors to the vulture funds, bailed out the bankers at our expense. Working class people paid for it with over 43% of the total European banking debt. And the consequences were, through the bailout of the IMF, the European Central Bank and the European Union coming to Ireland to stop building public housing. This was one of the conditions. They opened the door to vulture funds. They created a bank called NAMA that benefited the developers, bankers and the 1%. And led to devastating austerity for the rest of people here in Dublin, across Ireland, which we're still seeing the fallout of today. And part of this in the last number of years has been the huge increase in homeless figures. Up to 14,000 people now are seen to be in emergency accommodation. Nearly 4,000 of those are children. What about the rights of a child? That is in the Irish Constitution, protected. They're not protected from evictions, they're not protected from homelessness. 70% of people forced into homelessness come from the insecure private rented sector. And we suffer in Ireland from astronomical rents, amongst the highest rents in the world, amongst the highest in Europe, astronomical house prices where a home is completely unaffordable for people to attain to. Many have emigrated because of this, and then it's been exacerbated in the last number of years by the migration crisis, adding more and more people into an already pressurised system that is based on speculation. So it's completely manufactured housing disaster, but it's been exacerbated by the policies of the state in the last number of years, who've punched down on ordinary working class people, yet again, who are expected to carry the can for their policies and their decisions. But at the sharpest end, we see the people who are on the streets. 2 weeks ago in Dublin, on a freezing cold night, a man died on St Andrew Street in Dublin 2, not far from here. Over 400 people have died in the last 5 years in homelessness, known to homeless services, and people who have died on the streets. This is the reality of Ireland, where the political establishment have normalised it, have tried to desensitise people to the realities, the harsh realities of homelessness, and who have always tried to force people to rationalise homelessness. So rather than addressing it for the harsh and brutal, barbaric reality it is, they have tried to make people rationalise it, to blame it on people with addiction issues, people with other issues, or it's their own fault. And all this type of false narrative that's portrayed on people who have been impacted by the devastation of sleeping on the streets. This is the reality. The reality is it's a class issue. Working class people have always been forgotten about in Irish society, have always had to stand up and struggle for our rights, because it's a corrupt system that benefits the super rich, the landlords, developers and speculators. And in particular, the Irish government have come out with these far-fetched plans in the last few years. The most recent plan is called the Housing for All plan, which is a complete and utter farce. Claims to make more affordable housing available, more public housing available, a right to a house, a home, all this nonsense that in reality means absolutely nothing to people who are struggling on the streets and struggling in hidden homelessness. And we all know somebody who's been affected by these issues. We've seen more and more of our younger generation being forced to emigrate because of sky-high house prices, sky-high rents. We've seen huge issues created by these policies in society. But again, we've also seen the impacts on people at the sharpest end, as I said, in homelessness, where they have an increased risk of illicit drug use. They've reduced access to a GP. They frequently present at emergency departments, and frequent presentations for self-harm. And the average life expectancy of somebody on the streets is 38 for a woman and 42 for a man. And up to 20 times more likely to attend A&E than people who are in a home. And up to half of them regularly leave without being seen. And we know the pressures in our health system as well. So from a social standpoint and an economic standpoint, it makes practical and humane sense to have a proper housing first policy in place for people at the sharpest end, with access to accommodation plus the necessary services available for them. But what's happened in Ireland is that they've tried to start this housing first model in Ireland. Typical, paid lip service to it. It's not a housing first model whatsoever. They've tried to use private companies to introduce this. In 2019, a housing NGO, Peter McVerry Trust, one of Ireland's biggest NGOs, secured a contract for homeless services, the largest state contract for homeless services. where they bid it 10 million below the cost estimated by authorities for this housing first model, where the government has outsourced the housing first model, where the necessary support services would be available with the housing accommodation needs of people. As I said, the government has outsourced this to private operators, making money out of this also as well. And also the housing first model, based on the condition that the organisation raise 2/3 of the funds privately. So rather than the state providing the necessary funds to support this, they've actually made it incumbent on the organisation to provide necessary funding to push ahead with this housing funding model. But over the last number of years, this hasn't been anywhere near achieved. They failed miserably in their attempts to try and pursue this model. And recently, the McVerry Trust is in financial trouble to the tune of the 10 million plus euro. So it demonstrates a couple of factors. One of the factors that's important it demonstrates is the outsourcing of our need of housing, of the disregard the political establishment and the media have towards addressing our housing and homeless disaster by not providing security of tenure to people renting, long-term leases like they have in many European countries, which is a prevention. Another issue would be around providing required amounts of public homes in appropriate locations. And on top of that, when people fall into homelessness or are driven into homelessness through evictions and through various other issues such as social, economic exclusion, poverty, and all major issues, inequalities in society, which affects working class people, then there should be appropriate housing first model in place where the needs are met, where they have access to a home and they have access to proper services around that, where they can build proper communities and people are integrated properly. But what happens in Dublin is, with the vulture funds coming in, is that they buy out of even building public homes as part of their conditions of their planning agreement, where they don't want working class people living in the preserves of rich and wealthy, and that's what Dublin has become. It's a form of apartheid class system in Dublin, where there's areas that are just preserves of the rich and wealthy, and there's other areas of serious deprivation. As I've said, even this building is derelict. So the political establishment step up and support people keeping their homes empty, people leaving lands and developments empty, such as down here, derelict sites, where people can sit in those lands for a number of years, perhaps sell it a couple of times at higher profits and make huge money, and there's no enforcement of the Derelict Sites Act or penalty on these people. But they're benefiting, they're supported by the political establishment, who step up and support them at every turn, even with the amount of vacant homes around Dublin. So the housing disaster is completely manufactured, benefits the super rich, benefits the wealthy, and everybody else suffers the fallout of it. And then we have all the other issues happening on top of this, as I've mentioned, the immigration chaos, which is impacting this dramatically. And the government and political establishment are sitting their hands when they have practical solutions that can make Dublin into a beautiful city that we're all proud of. And I'm very proud of being from Dublin, proud of Dublin, but not this Dublin. Not this Dublin that benefits the 1%. I'm proud of a Dublin that steps up and supports people with dignity, with respect, with fairness, with decency. Not a Dublin that just serves the 1%. So that's the harsh reality of what's happening, and these are the real realities behind the government policies. When they say it's a technical issue, and they'll say maybe the next government might address it, unless we see a home as a social good in society, we'll be going from pillar to post for generations to come. So please, if you can, share my videos. Please like my YouTube page, subscribe, Peter Dooley Dublin. Please press like to my Facebook page, TikTok, and my X as well. I'm on that as well. And thanks very much for the support with all my work. I'm very grateful to everybody that supports my work, and we'll show you the real Dublin and the reality behind the policies that need to change in our society. We need to stand up for an Ireland and a Dublin that we're proud of, a Dublin that puts the needs of people before the needs of the land hoarders who are impacting huge amounts of social and economic vandalism on the working class of Dublin. So from Dublin today, take care. Bye bye. Talk to you all soon. Bye bye.